that. For those who don't know, Facebook made a recent update and is not letting us live stream via Facebook. So we have just diverted our live stream to our YouTube channel. So we're doing that, and we will let people know on our Facebook page where we are now. So please keep that in mind. In addition, you are more than welcome to have your cameras on or off. We ask that unless you're asking a question that you do have yourself muted, simply because that way we can make sure we can hear the panelists. As we stream via our YouTube channel, if you do have your camera on and you're speaking, there's a chance you'll be seen. So just make sure you know that, but you're more than welcome to participate visually as well. We would love to have you here. And then also we plan on this panel taking about an hour. I will be monitoring the questions in the chat. So if you have a question, feel free to direct message me. Again, I'm Lindy Wagner, so you can direct message me your question and I will get it to our moderator who will be taking care of those and directing them to the panelists. If you do have a question for a specific panelist, I do ask that you put that along with the question so I can make sure Dr. Letts also has that information. And so with that, I will pass the floor to our moderator who is prepared and ready, Dr. Nancy Letts.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindy. I'm really delighted to be able to moderate this panel tonight. I'm actually super excited that we're having this panel at all. I'm an anthropologist. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology, and I feel like I've studied Asia all my life, but basically, I specifically got interested in this topic of sort of the rise of Asian American violence after the start of the pandemic last year, and especially when our president and other political figures were, they kept saying the Chinese virus, the Chinese virus, the China virus. And I started actually getting posts or seeing posts from former students of mine who weren't Chinese at all. They were Burmese or Vietnamese or Indonesian, and they were saying, stop the targeting of us. We're not Chinese. We're not responsible for this virus. And so I really started following the sort of rise in Asian American violence or hate speech incidents. And it felt to me like it was flying very much under the radar until the salon shootings in Atlanta. So unfortunately, because of those tragic incidents, it has come more to media attention. But I think this has been simmering for a long time, and so I'm really excited to hear people who are directly involved in dealing with these issues. So tonight we have three panelists, and we will sort of go from the order. Every panelist has 8 to 10 minutes to sort of talk about their own views and experience, and then we'll open it up for questions. So hopefully it will be about half panelist presentations and then about half question and answer sessions. So our three panelists are Mr. Zach Yaw, who is a police officer here at SIUE. Our second panelist representing the business community in the Metro East is Mr. Nguyen Violet. And then our third panelist representing the Missouri Asian American Bar Association is Ms. Frances Barbieri. So I thought it would be interesting to start with the local perspective and then move to the business perspective and the legal perspective. So I'll turn the floor over first of all to Jacques.
Hi, I just would like to thank everybody for being here and having this dialogue. My name is Jacques Vo. It's pronounced Yaw Young Sak, but everybody just calls me Zach or Officer Vo. My family, a little bit about myself. My family and I immigrated to the U.S. in 1992 under the AmeriAsian Act. At that time, the U.S., after the Vietnam War, discovered that they had a lot of children that were citizens actually in Vietnam, half white or half American, half Vietnamese. And so they were trying to bring those kids back home to the U.S. And my mother is half Caucasian and half Vietnamese. And so that's how my family immigrated over here in 1992. We immigrated directly to Belleville, Illinois, and that's where I grew up. My parents, they work service jobs, industry jobs, primarily in restaurants, on and off. And I graduated from Belleville East High School. I went to college in Birmingham, Alabama at a 4-year university, Stanford University. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in arts and science, but specifically it was the religious degree, history of religion. I aspired to be a missionary, doing some type of service work to go back to Vietnam. Life just took me a different direction. I ended up moving back to Belleville from Birmingham because of familial obligations. Thinking that my parents were getting older now, they can't keep working the restaurant jobs forever. So being the oldest in my family, I just took it upon myself to one day take care of them. Coming back home to Belleville with a degree in religion, it was hard to find work, but I eventually found a job doing social work at a local agency here in Swansea, Illinois, SIVNA. It's Southwestern Illinois Visiting Nurses Association. They've been around for 200 years, and my job there was primarily doing assessments for the elderly to see what type of services we can get to them. While doing that job, I talked to a lot of individuals who worked in the abuse department, and that really piqued my interest. And so then from there, I asked, how could I get to work in that field? And they advised me to take a criminal justice class. So that's what I did. And then I fell in love with police work, and I applied all over, and SIUE offered me a job. And I've been at SIUE as a police officer for 3.5 years now. And then as far as, if we look at like I apologize for the train. I live right by the train track. If we look at like the community stats, like at SIUE, honestly, I guess we've been graced with with COVID. Has been good in that regard, because the community really had to disperse because of COVID, and we've had 0 incidents regarding Asian bias or Asian hate crimes. But personally speaking, I have seen it around, and it's really alarming in the respect that friends and families have approached me and asked me, like, what do they need to do to protect themselves? For example, a local market that my family and I have always gone to, it's interesting to see that they've actually hired their own armed guard to walk the parking lots and such, so that you hear about these cases all over, where the elderly or like the Asian elderly are attacked, especially during the Lunar New Year, because they're targeted because they're carrying around cash. It's customary to give cash to younger members of the family and such. So during that time period, a lot of elderly were attacked. But it all swings around to, I have had a lot of Vietnamese members in the society ask me what they need to do to protect themselves. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself and a little bit of what I know within this topic locally.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, and for that introduction. And I think we can come back to more specific experiences if people have questions as well. So we'll just move for the introductions to our second panelist, which is Mr. Nguyen Violette. I misspoke on his identification. I think I said Metro East, and I should have said that he is the president of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce of St. Louis. So really his experience, his group is much more St. Louis focused, although we in the Metro East like to claim it as our own as well, but I apologize for that.
Not a problem at all. We actually have a lot of members who are on the Metro East side as well. So we consider ourselves pretty, broad and regional. So so thanks first of all to Lindy and Nancy and Min for putting this together. This is an important topic. Unfortunately, this is the time that we have to talk about it. A little history about me. I was born in Vietnam. I was adopted when I was a baby, when I was 6 months old, and have lived in St. Louis my whole life. I have there's a special place in my heart. While I did grow up in St. Louis in the Central West End. My father was a professor at SIU his whole career. So he worked in the English department. He was the assistant dean, I think, for a couple of years, summer camp. So while St. Louis is my home, my second home was always SIU, and spent my summers over there running around with the Cougar and all of the things. So I'm honored to be part of this. So thank you. I spent most of my early career in corporate America. So I did sports marketing with Anheuser-Busch for years. And then I spent the bulk of my career at Energizer doing global marketing and international business. And about 5 years ago, I decided to kind of go out on my own, and I started my own company. We do information security and document shredding. And that at that point is when I really started getting involved in the community. And I got involved really in two areas. I also serve on the board of the St. Louis County Library. But my passion was always with the Asian community. And I found that I was surprised that I grew up here and was not aware I was not aware that the AACC even existed, and some of the tight-knit communities that were here. So that was something that I really kind of wanted to jump in and join. So I've been with the AACC for about 5 years now, and coming to the end of my presidency in about 3 weeks. So I will just be a hardworking board member after that. So, and I say I know we'll get involved and maybe talk about some of the specifics, but the last year it has been extremely hard on the community. As Nancy said, we really saw it starting when the China virus terminology and those words started really getting echoed. And what we tell people is, that I don't think that people understand enough how much words matter. And we hear all the time, well, it's from China, so it's just a name, right? And you have to take it to that next level and say, to you, it may just be a name. To the next person, it means something different. And now we've seen it kind of build and build and build. And the result is, physical violence and attacks on Asians. So, the words matter, and we have to stop that and make a stand early before it just starts to grow. So this is unfortunately over the last, 2-3 months, we've been really kind of laser focused on this because of the effects it's had on our community and the business community.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. I think we've raised already the two of you have raised a lot of really important issues that I hope our attendees will also ask questions about. So having started from a local perspective, local SIUE perspective, and then moved to a St. Louis and to some extent Metro East perspective, and from the business community, let me turn it over to Francis Burberry, who is the president of, let me see if I can get this right this time, the Missouri Asian American Bar Association. So let me turn it over.
Yes, that's correct. So yeah, Fran Barbieri here. I am president of MABA. Like Nguyen, my term will be ending in the next couple of months, which was originally supposed to end last spring, but because we were kind of in the midst of COVID then, and we thought we were postponing our large event in April to, maybe a few months, and that turned into a year. So I ended up staying an extra year.
Fran and I are going to have a drink together and celebrate our terms ending.
So MABA is it is a St. Louis focused bar association, but that includes Metro East. One of our officers now is based in Belleville, and he's always trying to recruit more members from the Illinois side. It was founded about 30 years ago by a small group of Asian American lawyers, and it originally, I think, it was really formed to build some community in a legal community that is, there's not a lot of Asian lawyers, right? But since then, we've built a mentorship program for law students, has been one of our annual programs. And we've also, we sponsor a unity dinner. I think last year would have been the 20th anniversary of the unity dinner, but we bring together all of the, like the Women Lawyers Association, the Black Bar Association, which is the Mound City Bar Association, and a few other of the diversity bar associations in St. Louis. And that is a really cool event. It's usually in April, like I said, and it's always been a really nice way to bring people together. In the past 18 months or so, we have done a lot more partnering with the other bar associations in St. Louis to really present on topics like implicit bias, and other kind of topics that have a more regional appeal that don't just affect us as Asian Americans, but they affect us all as St. Louisans, but particularly people of color and minorities. So that has been a really great part of serving in MABA. So that's the organization. A little bit about myself. I am actually also adopted, and I didn't know that you are new. And Zach, I studied religious studies in college, which is some pretty unique things we have in common.
Yeah.
So I was born in Korea, and I came here when I was less than a year old, and I grew up in Florissant, Missouri. But I guess my upbringing was pretty unique because my mom is, she's half Japanese. My grandfather was in the Army and served in Japan after World War II, and he met my grandma and they came back to St. Louis. So growing up, I had a lot of Japanese and Italian influence from my mom and my dad, respectively. It was just a really interesting family background. I have, Japanese cousins, and I have African-American cousins, and it was just kind of a melting pot. And I think I kind of grew up with this very naive worldview that we all get along, and like, this is great. And it's great to be different and to like share each other's food. And, it's pretty cool. And I think, so I grew up in Florissant. I was one of the very few Asian kids, like in my high school growing up. I think there were 3 of us, and one of them was my sister. And then I went to Mizzou for undergrad, and that's really like, I joined the Asian American Association, and I started getting more plugged into just meeting other Asian people, and also, a little bit plugged into issues that were affecting us. And then I went to WashU for law school. And, it's kind of in law school when I started really hearing about other people's experiences and how, racism is very much still a part of the world that we live in. And being in the legal world, it has, it's a lot more subtle than it is, I think, in other arenas that we see. But it's something that I have been active in, the entire time I've practiced, as far as kind of on the corporate side of things, working for increased diversity and more equity in how the law firms were managed. I spent the first 8 years of my career working for a law firm, practicing employment law. So I provided employment law advice to employers for the most part. And then I joined US Bank as inside legal counsel. And now for the last year, I've been at Worldwide Technology. I'm the chief litigation and employment law counsel there. So I've always been working kind of for diversity on the corporate side. And, this past year has been there's just so much has happened, right? I mean, obviously we've had COVID. Then because mostly due to, the George Floyd shooting and, other police shootings, there's been a huge push for diversity and inclusion and you guys have all seen corporate statements and everything else. So it's been really interesting in a positive way being at my company at Worldwide Technology, because they have, I feel, really authentically tried to get plugged into the employee population and what everybody's feeling and how the company can better serve them. They have spun up employee resource groups, which they didn't have before. And I lead our Asian American group, and, they give us like direct access to executive leadership. And I just, I have seen diversity and inclusion initiatives at companies go lots of different ways, and they're doing it in a really good way, I think, and really just helping employees feel like they're heard, and that, they might have different experiences than their coworkers, but they're all important and everything like that. So that's one positive thing that I've seen. But I know we've seen a lot of negative too. One thing that I wanted to talk about is, I in the legal community, the Bar Association, we have not heard of, people will approach us if they feel like they're experiencing something that's unfair, something legal where they could use legal assistance. And from time to time, we do get requests like that. We haven't heard of too many legal incidents like that. And for the most part, they've been personal disputes rather than alleged racism by like the police or other government entities. Except for there is this initiative by the Missouri Attorney General. I'll give a brief overview. If anybody wants to hear more about it, feel free to ask me. But the Missouri Attorney General has this initiative starts with it combating human trafficking. Well, that sounds great, right? I think everybody agrees that's like a really great area to focus resources. But the way that they're doing this is by targeting Asian massage parlors, okay? And the way that they're doing that. So then, it starts to get a little bit more, okay, is that that's just an interesting place that they've chosen to focus on. So then, going from there, the way that they're choosing to target these massage parlors isn't by traditional law enforcement, where they would, do like a sting operation and try to catch them like in prostitution or something like that. That what they did is, starting last fall, they sent out letters to the landlords of the buildings that where these businesses are operating. And they said, landlord, it's your duty to make sure there's no public nuisances happening in the buildings that you own. So now that you have this massage parlor, you need to go like investigate them basically. And they give them a list of like 8 things that the illicit businesses typically have. So it's like coverings on the windows, open late, they advertise on like websites like Craigslist and like Backpage. And so, it's the kind of thing where like, yes, if there are some businesses engaged in illegal activity that would meet all these criteria, but just because these businesses meet these criteria does not mean they are engaging in illegal activity. Well, as you can imagine, the landlords they were concerned, and the Attorney General is threatening the landlords with legal action on the landlord. So, that they're freaked out. And so they're, we've heard of cases where they're trying to evict these businesses without any real reason. And a lot of the businesses are owned by immigrants who are intimidated, and they don't feel like they have access to the legal system. So it's kind of a mess. It's ongoing right now. I think what they're trying to do is they sent out like 80 letters to the landlords. And then from there, for cases where there's a lot of suspicion that maybe there is illegal activity there, they're starting to file civil lawsuits. Again, it is not a criminal prosecution, which is just, that doesn't seem, it's just really interesting that they're trying to attack human trafficking, which is a criminal activity, by these civil lawsuits. So that's kind of the big action that we have our eye on. We actually haven't, we have a counterpart in Kansas City who's been working on some of these cases, and she has a lot of other potential clients who are looking for representation that she's not able to handle. But in St. Louis, we have not heard of the need for legal representation or other potential needs, but we are like, we're kind of having our eye out and keeping an ear out for those cases, because I think that could be an opportunity to get involved and potentially help, you know, even if it's just navigating the legal system and explaining what their rights are. So yeah, it's interesting, but that was the quick version.
Hey, thank you, Fran. That was, I mean, I think you raised so many super important points that we could follow up on. Luckily, at this point, we still have a small Zoom group. Everybody can fit on one screen. So I think that can make a really nice discussion if people want to have a little more back and forth. We're exactly at 6:30, so we have half an hour for Q&A. We have a couple of questions that were submitted in advance. Let me start with one of them that actually kind of links a little bit indirectly to what Fran was just saying. One person was asking, are there any services in the St. Louis area working with immigrant families where English may not be their first language? Is anyone checking with these families to make sure they are being supported for any racism they may be experiencing? Does anyone want to jump to that one? I mean, I can reply, but I think anybody in this room, I think, could reply who has knowledge about that. I mean, in terms of immigrant families experiencing, you know, racist incidents, are there organizations out there kind of trying to check on them?
I wanted to maybe just share one aspect. You're right. So this is a lovely window of participants. I wanted to properly introduce myself to Fran and Nguyen, because we've collaborated in the community work, but I don't think I've actually introduced myself as an SIUE member. I'm a faculty member in communication studies, that's arts and sciences. So to that question, one Asian American youth group that I work with will be collaborating with the Missouri Asian American Youth Foundation, that's Caroline Phan's organization, to hopefully do an initiative for the May Asian American Heritage Month. The idea is to mobilize high school students who may have some language skills to call upon Asian American senior citizens. The idea is possibly senior citizens might be a tad more isolated or disconnected or in need of some wellness check-in, or so part of that conversation will just be seeing how they're doing, if they needed any questions about COVID vaccine, and then to see if they've had any concerns about their safety, you know, so that we can possibly connect them with resources. So that's one thing that I can think of. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Does anybody else have anything you want to throw in, or actually, I think any of you could ask a question to any of our participants, just sort of direct it at the person you would like to answer, and we could. Yes, Sam Early says the International Institute. I was actually going to mention them too. International Home English Learning Program is also a wonderful program that works with women in particular who are often homebound. I don't know what kind of outreach they've been doing to Asian immigrant communities. That would be something really interesting to know if anybody has any follow-up on that as well.
Yeah, and I know, you know, Frances had mentioned Fran had mentioned one of the good things that come out of this from a corporate side, but you know, one of the things I think from an organization, one of the positives that's coming out is, while we have, I will say specifically the AACC has been connected to MABA, International Institute, different organizations, the Vietnamese community, the Chinese community, and so on. One of the things that we're seeing now is a more formal process by which we all communicate. So there are new teams forming and new groups forming that is representative of all of these different organizations around St. Louis and Southern Illinois that are coming together. So as things like this, as issues like this come up, it's not we can react faster. We can speak with one voice. It started back with, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, where we reached out to the African American community to make sure that we were doing what we could to support them. But we're seeing a lot more of that, you know, cohesiveness. I'd say formal cohesiveness, so that we can help each other. And then the resources, you know, become exponential. So our job is to make sure people understand this is happening and this is going on. And we encourage everybody, whether you reach out to the AACC, to MABA, to the International Institute, the Chinese community, know that there are resources that we share. If people have come to me and asked me for a legal advice, and I say, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I can get you in touch with these people really, really fast, whatever that is. Back to, you know, during the beginning of COVID, when people, you know, these small businesses were struggling with how to get the PPP loans, things like that. Now we have resources that we can share quickly, in much more in an organized fashion. So that's one of the positives, I think, that's come out of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've asked my students to sort of talk about, in my various classes, to talk about the impact of COVID on them as well, in sort of journal exercises where they didn't have to speak in the whole class. And, you know, many of them talked about disruptions, but then many of them also sort of mentioned positive things. And so I think it's nice to think that there are some, you know, some good things and some unifying things coming out of this, which actually leads to another question that Lindy just forwarded to me. There's sort of two parts of it. One asks the panelists about, do you feel like your experience as being adopted affects your experience as Asian Americans? I was going to say, before we jumped into questions, that just looking at our three panelists, I mean, it shows the incredible diversity of the Asian American community, and that, you know, this assumption that people make that they're all Chinese, just like, you know, ignorant people say everybody from Latin America is Mexican. I mean, it's so completely wrong. But I think, you know, the more awareness we have of the differences in experiences and yet the commonalities, I think, is really important. So if somebody wants to jump on the adoption, sorry, my son is being obnoxious, adoption question, that would be great. The other part of that question was, which I think is also a really interesting question, which sort of leads right back to what Nguyen was saying. It says, what do you think when people ask if Asians and Black people can or cannot be allies? Sort of how far can these alliances extend? I mean, it can only be within a certain sort of broadly defined ethnic community, or are we seeing inroads into broader alliances as well, which I think is another important question. So anybody who wants to jump on either of those,
I can take that. I'd love to talk about it. So I think the short answer is that there can be. You know, in my experience, it hasn't been something that has been like any sort of organized effort up until recently. But recently, we are starting to come together. So specifically, there's a coalition of Black churches that reached out to some people in the Asian American community specifically about partnering and just seeing how we can help each other and learn from each other. Min has been very involved in putting that together. I have to say, so we've met one time. It was basically a representative from a lot of the Asian American groups. There are many more that are present here that I didn't even know about. So it was great to just meet them, and then representatives from Black organizations as well. And you know, the one thing that we had in common was that we all want to work for like a more just and peaceful world. And we might not have had a lot in common aside from that, but it was just such a great meeting. I think we talked about ways that we can increase like cultural education, like to each other, and getting our kids together so we can pass that on. I mean, there's a lot of ideas still floating around, but you know, as far as I can tell, that's the first time that's been done. And we directly talked about, you know, the perception that we can't get along, and that we're, you know, each group is kind of scapegoating the other one, and how that's something that we want to acknowledge and prove wrong and, and really just work together. So, man, I don't know if you have anything else to say about that, but it's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and the next meeting will be on the 8th. I'm just,
Okay.
I'll send an email out. But I definitely agree with you. The key challenge, of course, after we got, some of the right people to the table, and of course, like you said, we would need to involve more people. Then the challenges become, what are some areas that we can focus on? And you're right. I definitely sense that one key area of shared concern is this need to pursue a more just and more equity in various regions. But I think we also have a shared interest in providing a more supportive environment for our youth. I think that's an issue of concern for both communities, right? Yeah, definitely.
I think I'll maybe I'll touch real quickly on the adoption front. It's very interesting. While I've worked with and been involved with Fran, we now even learn something about each other that we didn't know about the adoption. But I was adopted into a Caucasian family, and my wife is from St. Charles, and she is Caucasian. We actually adopted both of our kids from Thailand. So my son's 9, and my daughter is a very precocious 4 or 5. And we have always celebrated and tried to celebrate differences and teach them. We talk about Thailand all the time, and they ask about Vietnam, and just like every family would, and we teach them. There are what makes people great are their stories and their backgrounds, right? And we're, like every parent, trying to figure it out. What's the appropriate time? What's the appropriate age? And I told this story, and I'll tell it real quick. I told it at a vigil recently after the Atlanta shootings that was very poignant to me. When all this stuff came up, I was asked to do a lot of interviews on TV and radio. And so I had done about 3 weeks ago, did an interview with Channel 2 locally here. And I got home, and my son, who's 9, is, very smart young man, was all excited to see Daddy on TV. And the kids sat down, and I had that brief moment of, boy, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And I thought, we're going to do it. It's important to talk to him about it. But the excitement when he listened to the story turned to, confusion, turned to, a question that I was not ready for, which was, Daddy, why do people hate me? And it was heartbreaking to hear. But I used their adoption and my adoption and just kind of the makeup of our family to start, which was, we're all different. Some people, it's a fact. Some people do hate us because you're different, right? But that doesn't matter. We have to use that as a teaching moment. And so it's, it gives us, I think, just different perspectives. And I know they have a very different perspective on their first couple of years of life, which they remember being in foster care and just a different world. So I think that's what makes us all great is our backgrounds.
So I think that's a great comment. I want to go back a little bit because I think there were some parts of the previous question that were kind of left unfulfilled. But Tim Lewis, actually, I was going to ask Tim or Tarsha to jump in on this, and then Tim put a question. Professor Tim Lewis in political science put a question in the chat saying, what are some ideas, thoughts as to how the Asian community and the African American community, as well as other races, can work together to achieve racial equality? And you guys did talk about the youth programs, which I think is a wonderful starting point. But I know, historically in the US, there have been tensions between Black and Asian communities. And, in some areas you have separate gangs, like in Los Angeles, you might have had, Korean store owners with Black violence, 20 years ago. And so I think that there is, it sounds like there's a lot of goodwill from the Asian side. And I'm just wondering, what can you say to your Black colleagues to say, we really do want to work on this with you?
I mean, within the group that Min and I are referring to, there's a lot of ideas, and we are working to put together kind of some specific goals, but I think some of the ones that have been mentioned are like an advocacy team, and what I would envision that to be would be to work on local legislation and relationships with like city and county executives, maybe state leadership, and some of the Black pastors who've been community leaders in the past have offered their, guidance on things that they've learned in the past, which I think is super helpful. And then, like from my group, I know we can contribute legal expertise too, as far as advocacy goes. And then I think it also sounds like we're talking about even just planning some social and cultural events. And, once the world opens up again, that we might visit some of their churches and try to plan, dinners and things like that. So there was a really, so the guy who came from AACC, I can't remember his name, Nguyen, but yeah. So I think he grew up and he's from LA. And so he just had like the most interesting stories about being there during the LA riots and how his family was Korean and his uncle owned a liquor store. And he talked about some of the kind of cultural misunderstandings that happen and how if we can just talk about things that we can rectify them. Like he talked about how his, I think it was like his cousin or his family member, when he would give money back to the customers, he doesn't touch their hands because that's disrespectful in Korean culture. So he puts the money on the counter and then you have to pick it up. And so that offended some customers and they thought like, you don't want to touch my hand because I'm Black. And so like explaining why that was a custom and everything, that was such an interesting story, but it's how if we really can learn more about each other, then that it takes away those assumptions. So that's something I think the group would like to work on if we can kind of come up with a framework for that.
I would also say that one line that kind of stayed with me, and I just want to preface by saying that I'm not at all 100% on board with kind of this dichotomy that this one is with, but I kind of get the general idea. And the idea was, the person was simply suggesting that one way to look at our community's strengths and weaknesses and areas where we can learn from each other is to think about how Asian American communities around the nation may have more affluence, but they lack influence. And then this person is a member of the African American community, and he was saying that what they needed was affluence. They figured out how to have maybe a bit more influence than our community. And they're saying, that's one area that we can learn from each other. And I thought that's an interesting point that led me to think about how, for instance, in our Asian community, we sometimes are I think we're connected, for instance, with friend, your company and your Asian BRG group, and maybe you all have resources for community programming that we know of, but why can't we actually join forces with, Asian American communities, organizations in St. Louis and create programming that benefits both organizations. And I mean, that doesn't necessarily lead to immediate increase of affluence, but that's, that kind of led me thinking to how we can tap into each other's resources.
And I think one of the most important things is to acknowledge this. And I think, Min and Fran and all the others who are involved in this group, it's a huge first step, right? And one of the things that we talked about, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement that started, was we said goes to everybody, right? Individually, but also the organizations. We can't just nod our heads and say, yes, we agree. We have to publicly stand, arm in arm. So that's why we put out a statement very, very clearly saying we stand with the African American community on these issues, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I think that more organizations need to do that, no matter what it is, no matter who it is. And I talk to my friends about, whether it affects you, it's part of if it's happening to an Asian person or if it's happening to African American or whatever, I say I would take it all the way to if it's a male or female, whatever it is, we all have to stand up and say something together, right? You can't just let the you can't just let the Black community stand up when it's against them. And, now, we're seeing the effects of it and we're saying, where's everybody else? You have to make that stand. And we put out a statement again recently because there was somebody in the Missouri House that was, making continued to use the China virus in Jeff City, and we said no, we're not going to just let it go, and that's we have to all have that voice and stand up for each other. I think that's the first step in this.
Can I say something real quick?
Please.
I think also, like, if you would, I know that there's some people that are just like afraid to step out, make that initial step. Well, a small step that you can do is like Facebook, for what it is, it's really good with connecting people. There are plenty of groups on Facebook, like the Black and Asian Alliance Coalition group that I just recently joined. But through it, I learned so much history about how the Black community in the U.S. and also the Asian community have worked together to fight for civil rights. We've had a long history working together, and also in those groups, you have these difficult conversations of how, for example, one of the conversations was brought up. How come it seems like the Black community supports Asian-owned businesses, but not vice versa? And it's just one of those, just an example of the difficult questions that the community works through. And it's just, if anybody out there is looking for that initial step, I think that's a very safe way, just to sit back and read the conversation that is going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think ironically, one of the benefits of a year of isolation and quarantine has been that it forces people onto the internet. And while that can be negative, I think it can also lead to some really positive interactions. So I think that's a great suggestion. I want to just, I'm going to throw this question out here. I don't know if we want to take it up or not, but it was one of the ones submitted in advance that goes back to that sort of characterization of COVID as the China virus. The person asked, with vaccinations becoming available to the general public, do you believe anti-Asian sentiment will decrease, increase, or stay the same in the immediate future, and why? I don't know if we want to end on that, but I thought I'd throw it out there because at least it was submitted in advance.
Seems to me like it's not going to go away. I think one of the things that I've heard that as part of the kind of prejudicial comments against Asian Americans used kind of sometimes in conjunction with the China flu is it's about communist China and how that's such a threat to the United States. And so I think the people who are inclined to rely on COVID as a reason to, do hateful things to Asian Americans, they're going to find other reasons to perpetuate that. And I think that from what I've heard, that these kind of the talk about communist China and how it's such a threat to America is kind of a theme on some of the more extreme right-wing groups. And so that makes me think that it's probably not going to go away. So I don't think we can bank on that. I think we need to, gear up that this is going to be, a war, not a battle, but that a war that we can win with, by banding together and do so kind of in a positive way.
And I do think that with some of the the loud voices that may start to fade a little bit that we hear, I think negatively, it may start to go a little bit underground for a while. I think it will always be there. And I agree with Fran. I think, we've heard for many years, China's taking our jobs, China's taking this, and then I think the virus amplified it and gave it some more life, and now it's going to live for a long time because there are people who need to find an enemy and need to find somebody to place blame on. And I think it's natural. I think it's a natural extension of what we've seen will continue, unfortunately. And I think, it's our job to make sure it doesn't just live underground and not be brought to the forefront. So.
I have to agree with that, because one of the reasons, as soon as I started hearing the Chinese virus, I mean, it made me think back to, America's, huge long history with yellow peril and all of these things that link, foreigners with disease. I mean, I've been following this for a long time with the anti-Semitism community, which is also a community that really, it's an issue that really interests me. And, there's been an uptick in anti-Semitic attacks as well. I mean, partly linked to this perception that, Orthodox Jews were somehow responsible for spreading it. But I think, these long simmering prejudices, yeah, they go underground and then they come back when there's, when there's an incident that provokes it. But I think, going back to one of the earlier statements, and then I need to turn this over to Lindy to sort of to finish up, but that maybe the more that there are overt alliances where that don't put group against group, I mean, that really say we have things in common, we do things in common. Maybe there's, to me, I guess I would like to think that there's some positive hope there that can break these kind of siloized prejudices that keep, going underground and then coming back from time to time. So unless somebody wants to jump in real fast, let me turn it over to Lindy.
I want to make a comment about how everyone should put on their calendar for next Monday at 4 o'clock. I think, Linda, you're probably going to say something about it. Professor Ling Huping of Truman State is a celebrated Asian American, Chinese American history scholar at Truman State. And she will be giving, I think, our keynote speech presentation next week at 4 o'clock Monday. And I think I'm excited because I believe her presentation will actually answer this particular question from the research that she's done over many years. And she'll really focus her discussion about St. Louis in particular, from the early years of Hop Alley, and how during those early years of Asian American immigrant establishment in St. Louis in the Midwest, we were already seeing very, very unsettling examples of xenophobia tendencies. So this is not new. I think I agree with all of my fellow panelists that this will just maybe lay low or manifest in different forms pretty soon. So.
And all I was going to say is I need 1 minute. So if any of you all panelists have any final thoughts, I'd love to hear them too. I literally just need 1 more minute because Min is right. She touched on one of the 2 things I was going to mention. So I'd like to see if there's any other final thoughts that you want to share with anyone, because we still have just a couple minutes left. Panelists, that's up to you.
I'll start. I just want to say thank you for having me be a part of this conversation. It's opened my eyes to the amount of love out there from our FIUE community, but also the Metro East community. It's given me also a lot of resources and something to look forward to hopefully connecting with a lot of you outside of this and working together. So thank you.
And Officer, I wanted to just highlight one thing. From my work with the youth, I collected some data in St. Louis, and I've heard about some very unsettling instances of anti-Asian incidents. I would not call them crime, happening in Edwardsville. So I think it's too late to go back to do anything about those particular victims. But I think that in the long run, the community need to see folks like you who look like them, who are in these positions with resources to protect and to serve and to bring awareness, so that grown-ups and adults in the Edwardsville area know that they should not use certain kind of xenophobic language, because kids pick up on them and they can be pretty mean and brutal. And I've heard some really unsettling instances in Edwardsville.
Well, I unfortunately I got connected with the international group, student group on campus, but because of COVID, they stopped all meetings, and I was unable to connect with a lot of them. But yeah, I'd be more than willing to meet with any students on or off campus, and we can talk about things.
That's a great idea.
And I'll end with thank you, obviously, to everybody who put this together. It's the more we talk about it, the better. right? And the more people attend these and the more people have these the hard conversations, the better. So thank you very much. And to anybody in the audience or who's watching this later, please know that there are a lot of resources out there. We don't consider, as Maba doesn't consider ourselves St. Louis people, we are, metropolitan. So please reach out directly to me, or our organizations, for any help that you need, or if you're looking for resources, whatever it is, please reach out and we'll make sure we jump in.
Well, I'm Keigwin Gu. I'm a professor in engineering. I just want to thank everyone for holding this session. And also, we have a group of Chinese students in campus in our department, and it's very good to know all the resources available. And thank you very much.
And I think this time next week, we're hopefully going to talk a little bit more about data that we've collected from Asian American students and international students on campus, their experience. I think that's an important population to be thinking about as well.
Fran, did you want to jump into? I didn't want to cut you off because I know that you might want to share a last thought too.
No, everybody already said the things I was thinking. Just thank you, and please continue the conversation if you feel.
Excellent. And Min touched on the two things. All I wanted to say, if you haven't seen it, I've dropped 2 flyers into the chat. Please feel free to download those, share those far and wide. One is for our opening ceremony, because while we're doing events this month, the Heritage Month is technically in May, so we're doing our opening ceremony for Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Desi American Heritage Month on Monday, which is including the keynote that Min mentioned. So again, please feel free to download the flyer, share it wide. And then, as Min also mentioned, she is going to be a formal panelist, as well as some other panelists, which we're really excited about, that's going to be sharing some data that she's collected in the community, and then we've been able to collect from our campus population of students and their experiences with the same topic. So we're calling it part 2, mainly because it's a continued dialogue, it's a continued conversation. So if you've come today, we'd encourage you to come next time. Any of the panelists, you're more than welcome to come and be a part of that conversation again, because it's literally a continued conversation, and your voices were amazing today. I can only imagine they'll amplify the conversation next week if you choose to attend. So that is the closing today. I am so grateful that you've all been here. I'm deeply honored that you've taken the time to share the information, because right before we all let everyone in, we were talking about how important this conversation is, and it really, really is. And for those watching now on the stream and watching later, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And we hope to continue this conversation next week in different venues. So with that, thank you for your time this evening. I wish you good and peace this evening, and thank you again. See you later.
Thank you.